Alright, so what we're going to look at here, so the first part is the I kind of have to go back a little bit to talk about like the end of World War II to understand the origins of the Cold War. The Cold War, I don't really have the definition up here, but it's going to dictate international politics for around 60 years, right? 1945, okay, not 60 years, I think 40 years, whatever the case, 1945 to like 1991. So the Grand Alliance, and you guys identified this in the reading, the Grand Alliance is this, these three countries together because of Hitler. Once Hitler goes and leaves, or dies, I should say, right, that shaky confidence of an alliance is going to be tested. Many would argue at that time that it's impossible for these three countries to really get along because the incompatibility of capitalism, communism, democracy, dictatorship, etc., etc. And that's kind of my point here, the vast difference in these countries. You have the Soviet Union, who is a centralized communist dictatorship, which is the exact opposite end of the United States. We're one of the oldest and founding republics of the world based on capitalism and democracy. Vast difference. Now, does that mean we can't get along? Well, no, but we're going to have people in both these societies kind of pushing that way. And in the middle, you have Great Britain, who's a constitutional monarchy, right? They're also an island who's highly industrialized, but they're kind of smaller, 48 million people, versus the United States and Soviet Union, right? The United States has 132 million at this point, right? Just to kind of see where we're at now, we're at 325 million, versus the Soviet Union said 200 million people at this point. So, I mean, I don't want to say this, but I'm not going to say it because the camera's on. 20 million people at 200 million, I mean, that's kind of a lot, but like, you get my point. So, but these are vastly different countries, and therefore, like, when we come to, like, having the post-war order, or world, and these are the three guys that got to figure it out, like, they're different. How is this going to happen? So the United States is relatively untouched, right, compared to the Soviet Union, right? Does anyone remember how many Americans died in World War II? 400,000, right? Only 400,000 compared to the 20 million. So when we're at the table, imagine these countries at the table, and the United States is saying, hey, we have to do this and this and this. If you're the Soviet Union, and you're like, you guys are who? Like, you guys showed up when? Like, and that's the kind of attitude the Soviet Union is going to have because they put a lot of blood in the game, right? And you saw with this too, like even to go to Berlin. So it's not going to be an easy way. Now that Hitler's gone, because before when they're like at Tehran, and I'll talk about that too, at least they still had Hitler to go after. But once Hitler's dead though, like, what do you talk about? It's kind of like an awkward, situation where like you're meeting someone for the first time, you really don't know what to talk about, and then once you've already covered the basis, like, so what do? You go to school, play sports. It's awkward, right? That's kind of like what's going to happen here because they can't get along because they have vastly different ideas of what's going to take place. We've kind of already covered this. 16 million people are going to perish. Specifically, the heaviest hitting places are Asia and Europe. China doesn't get enough attention on this. They're going to inflict a lot of damage too from the Japanese Empire, right? You have a lot of people who are wounded or are considered refugees, or in the reading talks about internally displaced persons or IDPs. It's going to cause a lot of things. Not only that, I don't know if I'm even going to cover this because of time's sake, you have a population, well specifically I didn't cover this one, which is the Holocaust. You have, right, the refugees of Holocaust survivors being liberated by the Allies, and these people are rightfully so probably pissed that no one came to their aid. And sadly enough, there's a lot of evidence to suggest the United States did not, right? They could have, but they chose not to bomb railways that led to the concentration camps. Yeah, whoops on that part, right? And then also too, I don't know if I told this story about a bunch of Jewish people get on a boat called the St. Louis and come over to the United States. Did I talk about this one? Yeah, so like a record on that kind of sucks, which is also where we're going to make it up to them because when they start going to Israel, or what is Palestine at the time, and then in 1948 they're like, hey, we're a state. We're going to be like, yeah, totally, because the Jewish people need a homeland, but then it pushes out the Palestinians who have been there for 2,000 years. If you don't know the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, like in the deep history of it, it is fascinating, which it's kind of scary too because a lot of Americans think they know that topic, and they're very pro-Israel, which is cool and all, but like then they don't know the history, but that's besides the point. The United States is very untouched by the war, which gives us immense power because economically and physically, I don't want to say something nothing happened, But we come out of World War II, the most powerful nation in the world, like unquestioned, right? We have the people, we have the money, we have the resources. Soviet Union lost a bunch of people, lost a bunch of resources, and they're physically damaged. Great Britain is like pretending that they're still there, right? Obviously the other France was taken over, so like the United States is the guy, right, or person, I shouldn't be different, but you get my point.
That was so
Guy, four major wartime conferences. I'm going to kind of skip the one because, well, and it's really not the big three because they're not there. The Soviet Union does not go to the Atlantic Charter. Land charters outside of Newfoundland. Churchill and FDR are going to talk about self-determination. But you get my point. I'm going to talk about these three today, and at length probably about Yalta, depending on where I get to make my point. These are the big three. If you don't know these people by this point, I feel sorry for you on the test because that is Stalin, FDR, and Churchill. So let's go to the books here, which is Tehran. We actually started looking at some of this stuff. So if you look at it, I have the graphic organizer. Tehran is the first time these big three are going to meet, but we can already see the seeds of the Cold War in Tehran, right? First of all, you have Great Britain in this kind of first bullet point. Great Britain's kind of being ignored by the United States and Stalin. And this is for a couple reasons. FDR knows that if, like again, FDR and Churchill are kind of tight, they talk a lot. But if FDR spent all his time with Churchill, Stalin would be very suspicious. So therefore what he does is FDR kind of ignores Churchill and spends more time with Stalin. And they form this kind of bond, or at least an understanding, because Stalin's a very interesting character, and so is Churchill. And the guy that's in the middle of it, right, is FDR. And there's a lot of like historians that kind of play on this idea that like FDR is the middle person, that Stalin tries to see what he can get out of FDR by poking Stalin or Churchill as much as he can. The items discussed at Tehran are France, right? Stalin doesn't want France to be considered a post-war power, and why is that?
that they were working with Germany.
Yeah, they're essentially like, first of all, like didn't really fight, one, and then two, like once they're conquered, they don't really resist, and they pretty much work with the Nazis to establish Vichy France. So that's a topic of discussion. The second one is the fate of Germany, right? What do you think Stalin's going to want done with Germany?
Just control it.
Yeah, he wants to control it, and or more correctly, and that you're not wrong, just make sure that they're never around again, like to oblivion. And this is because twice within like a half century, they've been invaded by the Germans. And so the Soviets are going to start calling for a buffer zone, and that's going to cause conflict. Poland is another one, and a part of this buffer zone between essentially the western part of Europe and the Soviet Union, that's where Poland is. You saw that this document here, right? There's going to, like, the United States and Great Britain are going to want Poland to have free democratic elections. Well, Stalin doesn't agree with any of that, so therefore he's not going to be on board of it. But the United States is going to say, hey, we got like a couple million Polish Americans that have vested interest in making sure that their ancestors all are in Poland aren't being like under communism. Well, why did Great Britain get in the Second World War to start with? Poland. So like Poland's going to be a big sticking point. You can even argue that the Cold War like major origin point is over Poland, because the United States and Great Britain are going to be sticks in the mud on this, and Stalin's like, don't care. Right? Initially in Tehran, he's going to be like, yeah, Poland, they'll have free elections, this is going to be great. I'll talk about that in a little bit with the Yalta Conference, the second conference in 1945. They start talking about the post-war world. Why? It's February 1945. We're talking in a couple months, Hitler will be dead, and we're marching on to August to end the war itself. So, like, the Allies see the light at the end of the tunnel here. The problem, though, when they meet, FDR is pretty sick by this point. The race for Berlin is on, so as you read too, like who's dominating that? It is the Soviet Union. So they meet again, Stalin's feeling pretty confident, because he's saying, look, I'm doing all the work, or that's how he feels anyways, I'm doing all the work here, like, what do you guys want to talk about here? So they do talk about some of the similar things again. At this point, the United States hasn't developed the bomb yet, so we don't have a position of power, but the talking points are similar. Poland, the occupation of Germany, and then also the Soviet Union joining Japan, or the war against Japan, after Hitler is dead. So these are the major talking points. Yalta, though, gives credit for setting the plate for like agreements that will be broken, that is going to cause distrust. But here's also the major point. Yalta is the last conference where it's the original big three, Stalin, FDR, and Churchill. After this, right, FDR dies in April, May? April. I have this. April, it is April. April 15th. Anyways, he's going to die, therefore, all this stuff all this work he's put in, all this kind of character building, all this trust he's built with Stalin is going to be thrown in the trash, mostly because his vice president that becomes president doesn't know what he's doing, which is kind of sad, but we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So the Yalta Conference is the major one. What it really comes down to be is these three countries have vastly different ideas what the post-war is going to be, and that's what their next thing is. Now, you're gonna take a pause on the front sheet if you're playing along with this, and you're gonna go to the back sheet now, which there's three things at the Yalta Conference that show how different they are, which is this. One, the Soviet Union, I kind of numbered, you can summarize as much as you want. United States wants, I mean, just kind of like step back and take a look at these, how different they are. The United States wants something like a League of Nations, but United Nations, we talked about that yesterday, and unfortunately you had to see really weird pictures made. Soviet Union also, or the United States wants Soviet entry into Japan. Third, they want to have a decreased influence of communism in Poland. They're not even, I mean, we're concerned about democratic elections, but we just don't want them to be dominated by communism. Fourth, the United States wants China to be considered a world power or a major power after the war, right? The Soviet Union, on the other hand, is like no, that Poland thing, we want to be the central voice. We want to be the central kind of driving influence in Poland as that buffer zone, right? Which is the second bullet point. They want to have a buffer zone with Eastern Europe. Third, they want Germany to pay big time for the war. Now, this isn't to say that like the United States and Great Britain aren't on board with reparations or payments for like punishment for the war, but these two countries, Great Britain and the United States, are looking at Germany and saying, where are you going to take the money from? We've just destroyed literally to rubble in Germany, so where are you taking it from, Russia? Right? Physical money is not going to happen. Well, what Stalin's ultimately going to do is, in his zone that he's going to get of Germany, he's literally going to take factories, and I'm not joking by this, he's going to uproot factories of Germany's and take them back to Russia, like physical factories into Russia. And he's like, cool, that's payment, or at least a part of it. Because he needs something, because also his war industry was damaged as well in the war with the invasion of Operation Barbarossa. So this is super interesting with the large reparations, which again, it's not like the other two aren't like, yeah, we don't disagree, but it's not going to come from anywhere. The other one is Stalin wants concessions in Asia. He wants, again, this is why why they're in North Korea for a while. Great Britain on the other side, again, they're, I would say, the weakest in terms of like at the same point, right? The sun is kind of setting on the British Empire, meaning that like their power as an empire is waning. We're replacing Great Britain as like the eminent power, and it's like it's kind of almost sad. It's like kind of seeing like a friend that used to be really good at something and they're still pretending to be good at something. That's Great Britain at the time. They're just not there. So they're calling for the French to be a part of occupation in Germany. Why is this? And I think I have this on another slide. Germany, or Great Britain's not stupid. They see that the United States is probably going to leave Europe at some point. And when we do, right, Great Britain's going to want a friend there, aka France, to balance out the Soviet Union. So Great Britain's going to want to bring France up again, economically and politically, to make sure they're strong enough to weigh out the Soviet Union. So they're not stupid, but like, again, Stalin's not impressed by that. Which is funny too, because when he brings this up, Stalin brings this up about like, hey, France sucks, right? Churchill, and this is why Churchill is so brilliant, he fires back and says, hey, Soviet Union, remember the time you were friends with Germany for a while? Yeah, how'd that work out, right? And Stalin has to kind of back off because he's like, yeah, that's pretty bad on my part, right? So like, this is these whole conversations happening. The other thing too is they want Poland to be safe from communism as well. So there's similarities here, right? But they're not going to, right, agree on this. And ultimately what this comes down to is they're incompatible in terms of their demands of this Yalta, okay? So here's where it gets really nitpicky, so you're probably back on the front side again, is this. I'm gonna walk through some of these major points. And how much you really write down on this, I don't know. The Polish issue is probably the #1 issue. So again, I don't know how much room you're gonna have or how much you wanna write down. Stalin, I kind of talked about this, right? the other thing, just